Yeah, Jenny. There we go. I didn't know I was skinny. Feels like I'm sitting down. There we go. Yeah, well, so what?
System's freezing up.
I don't know. They can tell we don't have coronavirus.
Yeah, that's true.
You better get it though.
Huh?
You better get it all.
That's the thing I'll get to coronavirus. Freaking sun.
There's only so much Wi-Fi strength and this ain't doing nothing anyway. I just thought we'd see it a little bigger. Oh, yours, my voice is gone this morning.
Too much camp. We had a campfire last night, right?
You don't have
Stayed
your
out there
speaker.
too long.
Got those to that.
Is that why it said video has no sound when it popped on?
What's that? That up there should have sound. Yeah. Yeah, the mic doesn't do anything for that.
Okay.
Oh, Mike is from the WordPress.
Okay. So everybody can still hear us?
Yeah. Yeah, they can hear it. I believe they can hear it. I hope they can. It's, anybody complaining about the sound?
I just pulled it up and so far no.
Okay. Everybody here okay out there? I'm just gonna leave that down. It doesn't do anything anyway. Okay. Good to be back this morning, and hope everything is going well for you. It's Easter morning here. I know most of your places it's Easter evening, except for those of us in Canada and United States and South America. So I hope you had a good Easter, and
We got some. We're good.
yeah. I'd written something for Good Friday that I read here on Friday evening, at our Friday evening session. And I wrote this afterwards, just thinking about everything. I put, the evening of Good Friday came with Jesus dead, after darkness for 3 hours in Israel. The temple veil was ripped apart. The most holy was in plain view. Everything was in chaos. The disciples and followers were afraid because rumors had begun that with the help of the priests, Rome would gather up and kill the disciples of Jesus. The disciples were hiding through the night. Rome had the tomb surrounded with soldiers so no one could take the body away and claim he was alive. The ladies had watched where Jesus was laid to rest, and on the Sabbath day prepared spices and perfumes for the body, so they could go there on the first day of the week and take care of him. They felt that he had been forsaken, and they didn't want to leave the body unprepared. After hiding on the Sabbath, the women went to the tomb on Sunday morning early at the rising of the sun. They found the tomb empty, the stone rolled away, and two angels sitting at each end of the tomb. The angels told them he had risen and not to seek the living among the dead. What a rush it was in their hearts to hear Moses and Elijah sit there and tell them that Jesus was alive. The ladies went immediately to the brethren with the message of the resurrection. The disciples doubted their account, ran to the tomb, found it to be so. They all left, but Mary stayed behind. Saw a person she thought was the gardener taking care of the area, and she asked, "Do you know where they have taken the body of my Lord?" He said to her, "Mary," and immediately she knew that voice, her good friend, her loved one, Jesus. She had stayed behind because she couldn't imagine her friend Jesus rose from the dead and didn't talk with her. She knew the love between them. At the end of the day, they all met in a room together and discussed all that had happened. Cleopas and Simon came back from Emmaus. He told of meeting him on the road and how he revealed himself to them. As they were together enjoying the fellowship, Jesus appeared to them, bolstering their faith. The season of the resurrection was on and would continue for generations and dispensations. The worst 3 days of their lives had become the most glorious time for all humanity. And afterwards they thought he couldn't be alive. The life and light of humanity had stepped from the tomb. Not only had our minds been opened to a new world, also the way for the Spirit to progress from the blood age into the Spirit age had been paved, and the word had spread. Jesus Christ is alive from the dead, and he's alive forevermore. Imagining being there, thinking about each character from Good Friday all the way through to that Sunday morning, the feelings that they all had of disappointment. Jesus wasn't what they thought he would be. There were some rough times for them. Peter even got the brethren and said, "Let's forget about all this and let's go back to what we were doing for a week. Let's go fishing." And so there was so much going on. Even after the resurrection, Jesus was talking with Peter, and he made Peter say 3 times that he loved him. And sometimes that's the best therapy you can get, is having to face up to the fact that even though somebody sorely disappointed you, didn't do what you thought they should do, surrendered into what you thought were forces that should have been beaten down, taken care of. Kind of like Paul with Alexander and some of them. They all said Paul lost his power because he couldn't even do anything about Alexander or anybody else talking about him. So, Jesus made Peter feel that way. They weren't expecting a crucifixion. They weren't expecting him to die. They were not expecting him on the cross to bow his head, cry out, and die. And they weren't expecting a dead body to be hanging on that cross. Not one moment did they. And so Jesus said to Peter, he said, "Do you love me?" Peter said, yes, Lord. He said, then feed my sheep. He said to Peter again, do you love me? Yes, Lord. Then feed my sheep. Peter, do you love me? You know, Lord, I love you. He made him say 3 times. Peter denied him twice, so Jesus made him say he loved him 3 times. Because he wanted to give some positive reinforcement that those denials were not how he really felt. And as they all came through their feelings and came through their disappointments, in the end, there was Jesus in the room with them. And you know how great that had to feel to them. So I was thinking about all that this morning, and I've written down that I thought that I would talk a little bit on the movements of the spiritual government. We've been talking on both the spiritual and natural governments. Thought I'd talk a little bit on the movement of the spiritual government this morning. And in Mark 16, it said, when the Sabbath was over, very early on the first day of the week, they came to the tomb at the rising of the sun. It wasn't the setting of the sun. It wasn't the closing of a day. It was a new day. First day of the week. Brand new day. Brand new time. Brand new period. Moses and Elijah sitting at the tomb, waiting on them to get there. And speaking to them, telling them, those 2 angels were in the movement of the Spirit no matter when it was. There were 2 angels, 2 cherubims that guarded the garden, which were Moses and Elijah. There were two cherubims over the mercy seat, Moses and Elijah. There were 2 angels on each end of the tomb, Moses and Elijah. There are 2 angels that show up in Revelations 11, Moses and Elijah. They've been with the movement of the Spirit all the way through. In fact, they are the movement of the Spirit. Those are ministries of Christ. And so Paul makes a statement. We'll talk just a little bit on the movements of the Spirit, movements of the spiritual government. In Hebrews 12, Paul wrote, said, therefore, since we have so great a cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us also lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily besets us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. I notice here that Paul says us 5 times in one paragraph. And he's talking about a cloud of witnesses, and he's talking about a cloud of witnesses is surrounding us. And let us also lay aside every weight and sin, which is what we should do. As us, there shouldn't be any weight left upon us. There shouldn't be any sin that you think about yourself. It just shouldn't be there. That should be completely gone. I have never sinned in the first place. I've never done it. Sin is nothing but an illusion. And we've come to that fact and that understanding. So lay aside all those illusions and all those things that made you think there was something wrong with you. Just lay them aside. Those so easily beset us for the longest period of time. But now, let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. It's a level playing field. It's a clean field. It's ours. It's level now. There's nothing against you. There's no ordinances against you. There's nothing is against you whatsoever now. You're totally clean. So, Paul wrote that in Hebrews 12, and he was talking about a cloud of witnesses. And the spiritual government moving in the earth, when it does, it has purpose. Something doesn't just happen happenstance. When the spiritual government, when the Spirit begins to move to adjust the government or the power that is controlling the earth at that time, when he makes a move in that manner, it's for a purpose. It's not just to be different. It's for a purpose, and it brings the needed personnel and development into the earth at each step. When he was ready to move in any generation, at any creation point, every time he was ready to do that and make his move, if you notice, the correct people were in the earth at that time to receive it, to do it, to act upon it on every time. So he sends, not only does the Spirit move in growth to shift the powers in the earth, but he already has all of his people, manifestation, whatever you want to call them. He already has all of his flesh in the earth that he needs to make that move with. And they pick it up and they move with it. Growth is a must. And what seems like a long time is just a pebble of millions of years movement. Just look at 6,000 years. We would say 6,000 years from Adam till now. Wow. That's such a long time in our minds. It's just a pebble in a pond. It's nothing. And we think, you know, he's moved from Adam, and he moved down through and into Noah and into Abraham, into Jesus, into the church ages, out of the church ages to where we're at. Thousands upon thousands of years, such little movement. It's like me moving my finger right now. It's nothing. Time is nothing. And when we can understand that, all these moves that we think take such a long time, moving out of the great rainbow spirit into the pillar of fire, out of the pillar of fire into the theophany logic, out of that into spoken word of the earth, out of that into the last 6,000 years of humanity, you would just say to yourself, geesh, millions of years, so long, just a blink of the eye, just a moment. It's just a moment. We have reviewed time and time again the movement of the Spirit across eternity. And we've looked at that, or we've talked about cycles of all the seals, the trumpets, the candles, the plagues, the thunders, cycles of the mind from theophany to carnal to spiritual, cycles of the movement in civilization from the Rainbow Covenant to the Pillar of Fire to the spoken word to humanity. All of these movements, they're all movements of the Spirit to bring on a shift in the power or in the government that is regulating and moving across the earth. And so we've reviewed that time and time and time again. We only have a small measurement called time, but we know there is before time and there's after time. And so we keep inside this moment of time. It's a very small measurement that we know of, that we can think about in this carnal mind. We only have a small measurement called time, but we know there is before time, after time. You know, it says time should be no more, and it's said in the beginning, and we know there was a before the beginning. So we have all those wherein the same government is on the move, whether it's before time, in time, or after time. It's the same government, it's the same power, it's the same Spirit. He's just shifting the load, if you want to call it that, or the power, or the way in which we move and control ourselves. He brings governments into the earth And he brings them different governments for one reason, for growth. Think about the governments that are in the earth in the one world government as they are moving towards one government. Every one of them have been for growth. No matter what you call them. We look at some of them, call them socialism, we call them communism, we call them fascism, dictatorships, republics, capitalism, imperialism, you could just go on and on and on and on with all these controlled governments, and all of them are set up with good intentions to bring growth in a community or in a nation or whatever it might be. Now, some of them don't work out too well because you don't find, like we said Friday night, you don't find a benevolent dictator in most of them. You don't find a person at the top or peoples at the top that are thinking about their nation, their peoples, their communities. They're thinking about what they can embezzle or what they can take or what they can get from you, and it makes it into a government that's not very good. So we reviewed all those, and we see it as moving in time through sections of measurement in order to help us understand and define ourselves better. The creations, the forms, the shapes, and the progress of its processes are the way that the Spirit defines itself and its identity in eternity. I can identify the Spirit as Jesus. He defined himself over 33 and a half years that this is the character of the Spirit in his fullness, bringing us a redemption plan. I can define the redemption plan. I can define the intercession. I can define the mediation. I can define brother and sister, mom and dad. I can define family. I can define home. I can define all those things which I couldn't define before. That power had to move into the earth, and I had to move with that power and grow in it to understand it. Body change, I understand it now. Glorified body, I understand it now. Rapture, totally understand it. I understand all these things because I moved through the growth of it, and there was a section of time where I measured. We can identify ourselves as many of those things around us. By our creations, by the forms that we made. I understand what a bird is because I created one, and it's right out there, and it's hopping around in the yard right now. Some blackbirds, some robins, some sparrows, some of them eating off my seeds out there. I can define a squirrel because I created squirrels. I know what it is. I move that creation into growth. I can define human beings because I created one. Here I am. And so we do these things by creations and forms and shapes. And we progress through the processes of it. We progress through different processes that came into the earth. And you look at the wheat, and we know the process. We've said it a zillion times. It planted as a seed, it dies, it raises, it comes out as two blades, goes into the stalk, goes into the tassel, goes into the husk, and then into the seed again. And so we see the processes. We know we've talked about the process of the devil and how that it started out as a serpent. He started out as Lucifer, and then he became the serpent, and then he became the devil, and he became Satan, and he became the red dragon, and he became the son of perdition, and on and on and on. It was processes. It was you and I going through these processes. So all these processes, I can now define myself. I can see where I was each one of those things at some point in my life, and even today dealing with some of those things in my life. And the processes of life, for life messengers. I came through, I understand being totally free of sin, totally free of the weight that so easily besets us. Like I read about Paul's writing, I can see it because of the process I came through. I came through justification, and I came through sanctification, and I came through restoration of gifts, and I came through the baptism of the Holy Spirit, and I came through all of these things, and I come back to the full Word, and I can look at myself now, and I can see how I laid in all of those illusions, believing that's what I was, but through my process, I can now look and say, that's not what I was. I never was that. I'm a new man. I understand who I am now. So it takes all those processes. We know that eternity is a person. Eternity is not an amount of time. Eternity is not something beyond time on each end. Eternity is a person. Eternity is a person, and eternity just continually unfolds itself. And so the way it does it, we see it as it defines itself, it identifies itself, it understands who it is. We know that eternity is a person, and it just continues unfolding, rolling out its attributes into the earth. You remember what William Branham said? I think it's in The Rising of the Sun. He was talking about that cloud, and he said, that's our Lord Jesus up there. And said he is continually unrolling and unfolding himself. So out of that cloud, out of us, that cloud of witnesses surrounding us and who we are, out of that cloud, it continually unfolds and rolls itself out. And as it's doing that, we see the spiritual movement of the governments or the different things. The church governed for 2,000 years. Rome governed for 1,200 years. Napoleon governed. Alexander, Greece governed for close to 1,000 years. You could just go on and on and on. Israel governed for long periods of time. All of those things were different governments that moved into the earth. And then there is all of your prophets. You just start naming them. Every one of them was a government or a power that moved into the earth to shift the power and bring the people to something greater or something else that was going to happen in the earth. All of these things were forms of what's going on. We know that eternity is a person, and it just continues unfolding, unrolling, and it's putting its attributes into the earth. And the spiritual government moving into the earth moves through the cloud. That's what it does. It comes through the cloud. It brings itself into shape and into form. And what is the cloud? Do you know what the cloud is? It's people. When William Branham went into that cloud, when I went into that cloud, I didn't go in there and see streaks of light flying everywhere. When you step into that dimensional realm, you speed up, you step into that realm, and all of a sudden it's hundreds of millions of people is what's all around you. And it's beautiful, and when you're there, the people are beautiful, and they're beautiful in their age and in everything. It's just amazing when you step in there and see what's going on inside that cloud. And that cloud, if you remember in Matthew 17, on Mount Transfiguration, when that cloud dropped down and surrounded Peter, James, and John, just exactly the way Paul said it's now surrounding all of us. He said, we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. When that cloud surrounded Peter, James, and John, they saw Moses and Elijah walking around in it. And they saw Jesus in his glorified condition walking around in it. They seen all these things. And when they began to come back out of the cloud, it was so glorious to them, they wanted to set up temples to all these things and everything else. And the voice said not to do that it's Jesus only. It's just one person. And he's unfolding himself in so many different ways. So the cloud are the people. Rain clouds are what? What are all those rain clouds up there? What, when you look at a cloud, what do you think it is? You think it's smoke floating around up there? It's water. Clouds are water. And what is water in the Bible? All the way through the Bible, the symbol, water is people. And so the rain clouds, as we look at them every day, they are symbolizing exactly what's going on in the earth. People walking around. And so we have rain clouds are a type and a pattern of people. We know the symbol is water of people in the earth. The movement in Genesis to come into the earth was to move over the waters. Have you read Genesis 1? Start out with the first verse, go through about verse 4. It's a move over the waters, the cloud over the earth. And there came forth a people, a creation from the cloud. In the beginning, the Spirit created the heavens and the earth. The Spirit is the cloud, the people. Created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit was moving over the face of the waters. It was moving over the face of the water. The Spirit was moving in the people. You say, oh, it's talking about water. I don't think so. Read your scripture with a spiritual government in mind. And stop reading it so literal. The Spirit was moving over the surface of the waters, the people. Then the Spirit said, let there be light. And there was light. People began to show up on the earth they had created, and they were full of what? Light. Let there be light. And there was light. And the Spirit saw that light was good. The people moving into the earth, taking shape, taking form, doing things was a good way to express itself and begin to feel everything. It felt the earth, it felt the heavens, it felt the clouds, it felt everything. And as it began to move into the earth, the light was good. And the Spirit saw that the light was good, and He separated the light from the darkness. He let them understand what they knew, but they still didn't know a lot of things. And He took the unknown and the known and separated it apart and said, now you are full of light. Begin to seek more. Begin to understand more. Begin to take this darkness that you don't know anything about and discover it. And He separated the light from the darkness. And He called the light day. And He called the darkness night. So we see all of these things out here are symbols of exactly what was going on in the bodies that had come into the earth and have begun to take up the earth and have begun to live in the earth and have begun to lighten themselves by understanding of walking in the earth. So we see that going on. There was a great cloud, there was waters, and the Spirit moved on the waters. And what began to happen? Theophanies began to drop into the earth. Like Isaiah said, I think I forget the 50th chapter somewhere in there, Isaiah makes a statement. He said that the people, us, dropped like dew from the heavens. It was theophanies moving into the earth, taking form, taking shape, putting on earth, putting on things, beginning to develop things. And what did we do? That was the evening and the morning of the first day, and then come the second day and the third day and the fourth day, and all the way through. What were we doing? Creating, creating, and creating. It was us here doing the creation in the earth and bringing creation that would help us understand the unknown. We were light, but there was an unknown part of us, light and darkness, and the darkness was separated from, and we had to move into the darkness and create and imagine and do the things we needed to do to come to understand ourselves. So we see the first great creation as a creation moving from a cloud of witnesses. That's why Paul talked about a cloud of witnesses. That's why all the way through the scripture, I'll show it to you. All the way through the scripture, when the spiritual government was getting ready to move in the earth to bring on a different power, a different view, bring on more light, pull out of the darkness more light, bring from the unknown things more things known. Every time the Spirit began to move in that manner and shift, that cloud was present. It was there because that's how it moves. A cloud of people, which is you and I. We are in that cloud right now, walking and surrounded by this great cloud of witnesses, and we're walking in it right now.
You never left it.
So we see this. And the Spirit, let's go to the next one. The Spirit put a bow in the cloud as a covenant unto Noah that he would never again destroy the earth with its seed times and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. Oh, wasn't that pretty? A rainbow hanging up there for Noah to look at. You think that's what it was? I believe the whole time that ark was floating and that ark was on the face of the waters, there was a mighty cloud hanging over it. And that cloud was the same cloud you've seen on Sunset Mountain. That cloud was the same cloud that moved in Genesis 1. And it hung over that ark. And when that ark opened up, and they come out into a brand new day with a brand new government, that cloud began to drop seeds right into the earth. And they begin to fill the earth up and multiply it again with theophanies. And they took on human bodies and they moved into the earth. And they walked in the earth. And they talked in the earth, and they moved under a different government in the earth, and the cloud did all of those things right there, hanging over Noah. He put a bow. It didn't say in the clouds. Go back and read it. He put a bow in the cloud. Or he made a covenant. Those people in the cloud made a covenant that they would never do the earth that way again. We said, we're done doing that. We've learned some great lessons, and we'll never go through that again. And the earth is going to remain here. It's going to have seed times. It's going to have harvest. It's going to have cold and heat. It's going to have summer and winter. It's going to have all these things, and it'll never cease, and we'll not do this again. We made a covenant in the cloud that we wouldn't destroy the earth. So when the spiritual government moves, it's moving in a cloud of witnesses every single time. And the cloud of fire stayed between Moses and Israel and the Egyptians. All night there hung that great cloud between Moses and the Egyptians, between Israel and the Egyptians, and took a strong east wind, opened up the Red Sea, and that cloud hung there and protected them and took them across the Red Sea and took them to the other side, and that cloud never left them. Have you read your scripture? It said he was a pillar of fire by night and what? A cloud by day. You think it was just a little rain cloud? No, it was the cloud over them, protecting them, leading and guiding them. And out of that cloud they got quail. Out of that cloud they got food. Out of that cloud they got water. Out of that cloud they got everything. Just like you today, you get food, you eat, you drink, you walk, you talk, you learn. You're doing it in the cloud all the time. So we see this happening all around us. And it happens all the time. And Israel, every time they needed something, where did they turn to? The cloud. We don't have food to eat. And the cloud dropped it every morning like dew on the ground. And they went out and picked it up and ate it. We don't have meat to eat. The cloud gave them quail. We don't have water to drink. The cloud told Moses, go smite the rock, give them water. All the things constantly took place, and that cloud protected them all the way through. All the way through, that cloud has been around us. We have a cloud of witnesses. You talk about a resurrection, all the way from the time of the first creation when the cloud covered the earth and began to drop its bodies into the earth, and we begin to live through the cloud, walking in the earth. And the cloud took them through the terrible destruction of Noah, and the cloud brought them out of Egypt and walked them through the terrible days of the wilderness. That cloud was with them all the time. And that cloud was you and me. How can that be? We were in the cloud. That's the angels that came to Jesus in Gethsemane and worked with him and talked with him and encouraged him to keep going. That's the angels that in Elijah's day. And Elijah saw a cloud in the shape of a man's hand in the heavens. It hadn't rained for 3.5 clouds in the sky. There wasn't said. And it was just, the heavens looked like fire. And Elijah and his servant go out there one day after 3.5 years. They had faced Baal and all of his false prophets. They brought it to an end, and they walked out there, and there hung that cloud in the shape of a man's hand. It wasn't a rain cloud. It was a great cloud that has always shown up whenever a movement of government is ready to take place. And down came that cloud into the earth and began to rain into the earth. And when it did, away went Elijah. He was killed. Jezebel was killed. Elijah was raptured. The whole government changed. Jehu took over. You can just go on. You can look. And Elisha took over as a prophet. Everything began to change as soon as that cloud moved into the earth. And it began to change those governments. And it began to change the powers that be. And it began to change the way they lived. Where they went to for their fellowships, who they dealt with, the nations that dealt with them. It changed everything. The day Elijah caught that little cloud hanging in the sky. At the ascension. You know, we look at all these things. And I'm talking to you about Easter. I'm talking to you about what is going on with us. And how that we are a great cloud of witnesses. At the ascension, while Jesus was talking to them, you read Acts 1. I don't have to go over there and read it. A cloud came and received him up in their sight. And while they were watching the cloud, 2 men, wonder who that was, clothed in a cloud, came and said to them, Moses and Elijah said to them, the same way that you have seen him go, in like manner he will return. A cloud of fire, a pillar of fire, a people. And we say, well, Sunset Mountain's the first time it came back. I would beg different. I read in Acts the 9th chapter, where there was a pillar of fire, a cloud that came down, smote Paul off of his horse. And Paul said, who art thou, Lord? This great cloud, this thing that they seen. Some heard the voice, some saw the light. And Paul said, who art thou, Lord? And he said, I'm Jesus of Nazareth, whom thou persecutest. I ask you this question, who was Paul persecuting? Jesus had already hung on Calvary, and Jesus had been put to death, buried, resurrected, and was received up in a cloud. But the cloud said, I'm Jesus whom thou persecutest. He was persecuting the people. The people had become the flesh body of Jesus. Someone asked me the question, said, Brother Parnell, that body that Mary met him in at the tomb, what body was that? And I said, it was his resurrection body at the time. Because that body did have to get up out of the grave. That body of Jesus, that literal body that hung on Calvary, was smitten and beaten so bad till you couldn't even tell who he was. And Joseph Arimathea took him and laid him to rest in a tomb. And that body, that same body, got up. And when it got up, he changed himself. Mary didn't even know who he was. Cleopas and Simon didn't know who he was on the road to Emmaus. Read the book of Mark. When they were on the road to Emmaus, they couldn't tell who he was because he had changed. So that body of resurrection body was the literal body of Jesus, but then he took that body and he put that body back into the cosmos where he got it from, and he has become our body. We are his body, and this is the flesh that Jesus is wearing around today. Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? Who art thou, Lord? I'm Jesus of Nazareth, the one you're putting in jail, the one that you're shutting down churches, the one. He was all the witnesses surrounding Saul, and Saul was fighting against this great cloud of witnesses and fighting against the weight and the sin that so easily beset him and made him stay with Moses' law. And that cloud returned back exactly the way these people, exactly the way these two men said it would. It returned back and it took over that ministry of Paul. The same way that you have seen him go, in like manner he will return. I believe that. I believe it's already happened twice. You come over to the 10th chapter of the book of Revelation, and you read that 10th chapter, and it says, I saw a mighty angel coming down out of heaven, clothed with a cloud, and the rainbow was upon his head, and his face was like the sun, and his feet, and creation moved right down out of the cloud into the earth. In Genesis 1, we watched the creation move down out of the cloud into the earth in Genesis 8. We watched the creation move down out of the cloud into the earth in 1 Kings 17th chapter, Elijah. We watched the cloud move down into the face of the earth, and it took over Pentecost in Acts 2, and it split up, and it went into each one of them and filled them full. The same way that he said he would come back, he did. He did it on the day of Pentecost. He did it to Paul, and now here he is doing it again. This great cloud of witnesses. The same way that you have seen him go, in like manner here return. I seen a mighty angel coming down from heaven. That was in Revelations 10. You know, if you go over and you read in Revelations 14, you've seen an angel with a sickle in his hand. If you go over to Revelations 18, seen an angel that came down from heaven and enlightened the earth with his glory. Seen all of these things were going on, and this angel had a sickle in his hand. He had a book in his hand. There's all kinds of different things that this angel, this great cloud of witnesses had, that they were bringing governments into the earth. There was a government that came into the earth, which was a government of harvesting. And that government came, and that great sickle came into the earth, and men like William Branham and all the way back through Paul Arenas, Martin Columba, they had a sickle in their hand, and they were harvesting everything out of the church ages that they could harvest, and bringing us to the unknown and opening up the darkness and bringing light. And then what took place? When the sickle was finished, what was next? Here's the same angel, the same being, the same light, the same cloud, the same people, and it's no longer a sickle in their hand, but it's a book. They're supposed to be doing the things to prepare and bring the great government into the earth. Well, there's a government coming into the earth now, and it hasn't been here before. It's a one world government, and it's a one spirit government. A one spirit government being this spiritual movement coming out of the cloud and dropping the people that need to be here at the time into the earth through their mothers, through their fathers, bringing them into there, bringing them up through their family situations, teaching them the differences of light and darkness, night and day, teaching us our education, showing us who we are, and breaking us open to love divine, the understanding that we have. It's all going on at the same time. These things were a purpose in the earth. Luther came